Imagine a world without iPads, a time when chunky desktops ruled, and the internet was a distant dream for most. Now, picture an inventor in 1987, not just conceiving of a tablet computer, but actually building one that mirrored many of the features we take for granted today. How did a device so ahead of its time emerge from the technological Stone Age, only to vanish into obscurity, leaving behind a tale of innovation, ambition, and a haunting question? What if we'd embraced it then? To truly grasp the audacity and prescience of this forgotten marvel, we need to rewind to the late 1980s. This was an era dominated by the beige box, the personal computer, often sitting static on a desk, tethered by cables. IBM PCs, Apple Macs, and their clones were the titans. Software was floppy disk-based, user interfaces were clunky, and the idea of interacting with a computer using anything other than a keyboard and a mouse was practically science fiction. Yet, even as these behemoths solidified their control, a few visionaries began to chafe against the limitations. They saw a future where computing wasn't confined to an office or a desk. They envisioned a personal, portable device, intuitive enough for anyone to use, powerful enough to reshape how we worked and lived. This wasn't merely wishful thinking. This was the genesis of an idea that would culminate in a device nearly 2 decades before its widespread acceptance. The technological infrastructure was nascent, processing power was meager by today's standards, and battery life was a constant struggle. Most people were just trying to figure out how to navigate DOS commands, let alone imagine a screen they could write on directly. It's in this backdrop of technological constraint and boundless human imagination that our story truly begins. A story about a company called Go and its enigmatic creator, Jerry Kaplan, who dared to dream of a computer that felt less like a machine and more like an extension of thought. Jerry Kaplan, a brilliant and somewhat eccentric entrepreneur, had a revolutionary idea: a computer that you could interact with using a stylus, much like a pen on paper. This wasn't just a gimmick, it was a fundamental shift in human-computer interaction. Kaplan founded Go Corporation in 1987, armed with this audacious vision and an almost fanatical belief in its potential. But turning this dream into a tangible product was an odyssey fraught with peril. The first hurdle was convincing skeptical venture capitalists that a pen-based computer wasn't just a fantasy. They were accustomed to seeing incremental improvements on existing technologies, not radical departures. Kaplan, however, was a charismatic force, managing to secure significant funding from giants like AT&T and IBM. The technological challenges, though, were immense. How do you design an operating system that recognizes handwriting reliably? How do you create a screen that's both durable and responsive to touch? How do you cram enough processing power into a portable form factor without draining the battery in an hour? These were questions that Silicon Valley was barely beginning to ask. The development of Geo's operating system, PenPoint OS, was an engineering marvel. It was designed from the ground up for pen input, a paradigm shift from traditional graphical user interfaces. Imagine Windows, but every interaction was designed around tap, drag, and gesture with a stylus. This required entirely new ways of thinking about menus, navigation, and even application design. The team at Geo, a collection of some of the brightest minds in computing, worked tirelessly, innovating on every front. They had to invent new algorithms for handwriting recognition, develop custom hardware components, and pioneer concepts that would later become staples of touchscreen computing. The tension within the company was palpable. They knew they were on the cusp of something monumental, but the pressure to deliver, to prove their vision, was immense. Then, the giants started to stir. Microsoft, seeing the potential threat, initiated its own pen computing project known as Pen Windows. This wasn't just competition, it was a looming shadow, an indication that if Go faltered, a different, more powerful player was ready to step in and claim the territory. The stakes were impossibly high, and the journey toward launch was punctuated by endless late nights, internal debates, and the constant fear of failure looming over every line of code. The year was 1991, and Go Corporation finally unveiled its creation, the Go PenPoint tablet and its revolutionary PenPoint OS. The world was, for a brief moment, stunned. Here was a device that looked and felt like something ripped from a futuristic movie. It was sleek, interactive, and promised a whole new way of working. Initial reviews from tech journalists were a mix of awe and skepticism. They recognized the brilliance of the concept, but questioned its practicality. The technology was undeniably groundbreaking, yet the market wasn't ready. The price point was exorbitant for the time, often several $1,000s per unit, placing it far out of reach for the average consumer. But the biggest hurdle wasn't just cost, it was the ecosystem, or rather, the lack thereof. PenPoint OS was entirely new, meaning there was no existing software compatible with it. Developers had to relearn, recode, and reimagine their applications from scratch. This was a massive ask in a nascent industry already grappling with the complexities of desktop computing. Furthermore, handwriting recognition, while impressive for its era, was far from perfect. It was a painstaking process to train the system, and even then, errors were common, leading to user frustration. The public, accustomed to the immediate gratification of a keyboard, found the learning curve steep. People just weren't convinced that writing on a screen was better than typing, especially when the payoff wasn't crystal clear. Companies that invested in the Geo tablet, hoping to revolutionize their field operations, often found the transition difficult and the return on investment elusive. Meanwhile, Microsoft's Pen Windows offered a less radical but arguably more practical approach. By building pen input on top of the familiar Windows interface, Microsoft allowed existing applications to run, albeit with limited pen functionality. This meant a lower barrier to entry for users and developers alike, slowly but surely cornering the nascent market. Geo's bold, uncompromising vision, while technologically superior in many ways, ultimately proved to be its undoing. The company, bleeding money and unable to gain significant market traction, eventually sold its assets to AT&T in 1994. The dream of the pen-based tablet for a time seemed to die with it. A true pioneer, sacrificed on the altar of market unpreparedness and the relentless pressure of industry giants. It was a tragic end for a company that had dared to build the future. Though Go Corporation itself faded into the annals of tech history, its influence, like a ghost in the machine, never truly vanished. Many of the fundamental concepts pioneered by PenPoint OS, gestures, on-screen keyboards, contextual menus, and, of course, direct pen input, found their way into later operating systems and devices. Apple's Newton message pad, though also ultimately unsuccessful, clearly drew inspiration from Geo's pioneering work. And decades later, when the iPad exploded onto the scene, many tech enthusiasts familiar with the Geo story couldn't help but see echoes of Kaplan's original vision. The iPad finally succeeded where Geo failed, not because its core idea was entirely new, but because the technological landscape had matured. Processors were faster, screens were better, manufacturing costs had plummeted, and, crucially, the internet had created an ecosystem of developers and content hungry for new platforms. The consumer was also finally ready, primed by years of mobile phone adoption for an intuitive, touch-based computing experience. The story of Go Corporation serves as a potent reminder that innovation isn't always about being first. Sometimes, it's about being first at the right time. Kaplan's tablet was a masterpiece, but it arrived at a symphony where the audience wasn't yet tuned to its frequency. To this day, the legacy of Go Corporation remains a fascinating what if. What if they had secured a major software partner? What if the technology had been just a little bit cheaper, a little bit more accurate? Could the tablet revolution have started in the early 90s, fundamentally altering the trajectory of personal computing? We may never know the full truth of how differently our digital world might have looked. But one thing is clear. The tablet that beat the iPad by 20 years, though ultimately unsuccessful, laid crucial groundwork, proving that the future of computing wasn't always going to involve a mouse and keyboard. Its spirit lives on in every touchscreen we interact with today, a silent testament to a vision born decades ahead of its time. If you want more stories of technological marvels that were ahead of their prime, the next video dives into the untold tale of the VR headset that could have changed gaming forever, almost 30 years ago.